welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today I'm excited as we now get to dive into some solo gameplay for Frostpunk, the board game from Glass Cannon Unplugged. I've already gone ahead and set up for a new home crater scenario, which is the one the rulebook depicts as the best scenario to set up when you're first learning the game. And also, I'll put a link in the top right-hand corner to my setup video, which takes you through all the steps of setup to help you get that to the table. You can see a visual of it from the top of the table here. We're going to dive into it. We're going to talk quickly about the objectives of the game, how we can lose, and we're also going to talk about some things we need to be aware of before beginning our very first round of play. It's also worth mentioning when you start off a game in Frostpunk, you don't begin at the very first phase, which is the dawn phase. You actually begin in the action phase, which is the 6th phase of the game. In the summer of 1886 of Frostpunk's alternative history, the snowstorms began. Crops failed, people starved, millions fled south. They met only chaos, famine, and death. In the furthest reaches of the resource-rich north, the British Empire began construction of heat-bearing generators where a chosen few could survive, safe from the chaos of crumbling civilization. But they ran out of time. An apocalyptic ice storm came from the north, devouring everything in its path. Some survivors managed to cross the seas and reach the site of a generator only to find it frozen solid. The generator was designed to power a city capable of weathering the end of the world. It falls to us to build that city, and so New London is established. In Frostpunk, in order to survive, you will need to constantly balance your decisions between managing and growing your city and maintaining the morale and mood of its citizens. After the apocalyptic global cooling, the only heat comes from the generator in the center of the city, and if you neglect it, everyone will freeze to death. The people who rely on your decisions are all that remains of humanity. Many lost their loved ones, and all of them were ripped from their previous lives and thrown into this new harsh reality. They are survivors and the ones that made it, but this does not mean they are dispassionate machines. The decisions you make have consequences, both immediate and long-term, and your choices might go against your own moral code, and some laws you enact may seem strict or even cruel. So the question really becomes, how far will you go to ensure the survival of the last city on Earth? There are 5 main features of Frostpunk, the board game. The first one is making laws. You're going to establish laws that regulate the existence of your growing society. You get to decide on your citizens' working routine, their healthcare, their food provision, and other crucial aspects of everyday life. You'll shape your society. When you reach a turning point, don't hesitate to determine the path for your people. Should you rule them with an iron fist, or should you show them a way of compassion and faith? You get to reach for extremes, or you can try to find a fair balance. Whichever you choose, remember, there's no turning back. You'll need to weigh your choices. Some of your decisions will seem small, like deciding the fate of a troubled citizen or meeting the demands of a newborn faction, but be aware that the sum of your actions can lead to unexpected results. Survival demands progress. You're going to need to develop new technologies, react to current events, but do not forget about the long term and investing in development and technological progress. Finally, exploring the Frostland will become very important. While New London is your main focus, there is much more to the world than what lies within the limits of your city. Expeditions, while risky, can bring you valuable intel and precious supplies. There may even be people out there, and their fate lies solely in your hands. Now let's cover win and loss conditions. You win the game if you complete the goal of the scenario, which is detailed on the scenario cards. So you'll see here we start with scenario card number 1. This one is called Are We Alone? It says, civilization has fallen. We, the survivors, traveled in a convoy that split into several groups to increase the chances of reaching a functional generator. Our group succeeded. What fate has befallen the others? Lighting up a signal to guide the lost souls will help to answer that question. You'll see there are timed events which will happen. So we have at round 4, determining whether or not we've got the beacon built by that point. If we do, we focus on A. If we don't, we focus on B. And then by round 11, we have something else going on as well, which will change up scenario cards in the display. On the round and morning board, on the left-hand side where we track our rounds, you'll see that slot 4 and 10 are filled in with scenario trigger tokens to remind us of when these triggers occur. Now that we know what we need to focus on moving forward, let's talk about how we lose the scenario. First off, the people can lose their will to survive, and this occurs when the last hope token is removed from the hope track, and those are the teal-colored markers at the bottom of the track. You can also lose because the people banish you from the city, and this occurs when you place a 6th discontent token, which are the red tokens on the track, onto the discontent track, which runs left to right. And you'll also notice in the furthest right position on the discontent track, there is a skull. You'll see this icon in a number of places throughout gameplay where it's going to trigger a loss. Another way we can lose the game is if the generator explodes, and this occurs when the generator breaks down for the second time. There are two ways to lose the game, which are found on the population track. The first is overwhelming sickness, and this occurs if the sickness markers, which are these three markers right here, ever make it all the way up the track to the 26th position or higher. You can see it denoted by all these skulls along here. In the preparation phase, you lose the game, so you don't want to have overwhelming sickness going on. The second way you can lose off the population track is overwhelming hunger, and this occurs, of course, when your hunger is going to go all the way to the very end of the track, and there's an icon there to depict that the game is lost at that point as well. You do get the chance to spend food to decrease this, though. So essentially, the timing on this is that you have to hit level 25 or more after spending food to decrease hunger. If you're still above that, well, you've lost the game. The final way to lose the game is from overwhelming deaths, and this occurs when the corpse marker moves to the last space on the corpse track. Again, in the 10th position, there is a skull icon depicting this. So as you can clearly see, Frostpunk the board game is a survival game through and through, and this post-apocalyptic world, we have our work cut out for us. One correction I want to make from the setup video is around a fire marker which is on the generator board. It's currently right now set up on the overheated side. It should be on the normal side. So at this point, let's get into some gameplay. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we're going to start in the actions phase when we begin the game. There's 2 bullet points here which we're going to ignore because it's not going to have any impact for the very first turn or round of the game. But we are going to focus on performing actions, and that's going to be spending our meeples in order to accomplish tasks. Now, one thing to note before we go ahead and decide how we want to spend our meeples, it's worth mentioning, of course, we cannot use children to accomplish tasks until we do something like enact a law or use some kind of in-game ability that allows for child labor or some type of usage of children. As of right now, they're children, and that's what they are. And we have engineers in blue and we have workers in orange. Now, the thing we can do prior to deciding where we want to start placing our workers when we're playing solo again, we'll be doing a worker one after the other until all are spent or until we decide to stop. But the one thing we have the availability to do is to place coal inside the generator, and this can provide heat for a number of tiles depending on how much coal we throw in there. So now we move to the generator board, which is a very important board to manage because, well, things are very cold right now. We have a cold marker up here, and that means everything below it, because the heat marker is way down here, which is essentially everything right here, is freezing cold. So that includes all red buildings, orange buildings, and yellow buildings. These are broken up by insulation level. This is the most insulated, medium, and the lightest insulated. And then you have also how far out from the generator tile do you have heat? So essentially, regardless of the building type, how far out are you pumping heat out further from the generator tile? So you have the generator tile itself, generator tile and hexes around it, and all the way out to the furthest landscape. It always costs 1 coal to move up 1 level, and you can see this denoted along the right-hand side. So for me right now, if I was to just spend 1 coal, the marker would move like this, letting us know, based on the line that goes right through, that the generator tile itself is now heated based on the coal going in, and all red insulation buildings are also heated. What's really interesting about this is that the generator tile, of course, is right on the generator. So that's the obvious one by putting 1 coal in. The cool factor is the red buildings, because they are so well insulated, they don't require a ton of heat, meaning you can build them really far away from the generator tile and they'll still maintain their heat. For me, I want to push it 1 level higher, so in the end, it's going to cost me 2 coal to get to this level, so the fire marker's up here, which means all orange buildings, red buildings, and all the way out to the hexes around the generator in the first row around it are going to be considered heated. What I just did was completely optional. You do not have to put coal in at this point, but in the actions phase at the beginning, I'm choosing to, so I put 2 coal from my supply into the bank. I now have 3 left over. So now that we're going to be moving into actions, this tile is completely heated. The next row all the way around the outside of the generator tile is also heated, and red and orange buildings are heated as well. The reason this is important is because if you take an action during the actions phase right now in a heated area, the citizens will not take any ill effects. However, if you actually take a cold action where there is no heat, the citizens will suffer ill effects. My first action is going to be to use a worker to remove some snow. We'll place it down here so we can choose 2 near tiles or 1 far tile, and you'll also notice that there is an icon for sickness over here. We'll talk more about that later on. The sickness icon is there, of course, because we're removing snow, and that would be a cold action. It's always considered cold regardless of the heat generated through the generator. Now, at this point, my choice was to take 2 near tiles and place them anywhere I wish. Of course, they had to be adjacent to the generator if I chose near tiles, or could have taken 1 far tile if I wanted to. The 2 tiles also don't have to be adjacently placed. It looks like we got a whole bunch of wood here and 1 space with coal. Now, something else worth mentioning, and I was actually kind of hoping it would work out, is that if you happen to find any symbol for food on the tiles you reveal, you also gain that food right away. Unfortunately, didn't find it. Next, I'm going to place a number of workers in order to gather a bunch of wood. Now, this is called the Gather Resources action. You do this 1 at a time. I've gone ahead, though, and placed, because I'm going to do this multiple times, a meeple in a majority of different wood locations. So each of these hexes is broken into 2 spaces. You can only have 1 meeple sitting and gathering in one side of that particular hex. So in this case, the most I can take from any space inside the hex is 2 of any resource. So I'm choosing to take the 2 wood here, 2 wood there, 2 wood over here, and 2 wood far back over there for a total of 8. The trees have been chopped down and placed inside the supply. Worth mentioning, blue engineer meeples can be used for the gathering resources action as well. It doesn't have to be worker meeples. They cannot, however, be children meeples unless you have a law which allows, like child labor, for them to go out and do such things, or you have a citizen card that is specific to children in play. At this point, based on our supply, we have 3 engineers in blue left in terms of doing actions. I actually have a plan here in terms of how I'm going to use all this wood in order to get some shelters going for my city. In order to use this wood that I've gathered, I've chosen to place an engineer meeple in the build location on the supply board. You'll see to the left of that meeple, there is a hammer icon and there's a house with an X through it. That stands for build or dismantle, and you can choose which one you want to do. And there's a ×3 on the other side of that shadowed in area that lets you know you can do that 3 times for every construct action you do. So by placing the 1 engineer meeple in this space, we can do 3 different sub-actions. So we could do a build, a dismantle, and a build. We could do 3 builds. We could do 3 dismantles, however you want to dice it up. Again, to do this action, it doesn't have to be an engineer meeple. It could have been a worker meeple as well. It just happened to be the engineers because that's all I had left. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build 3 buildings. I'm going to build 3 tents. And as you can see over here, the cost for the tents are going to be 2 wood apiece. There are a total of 4 tents that you can build. I've got 3 of them. I've already paid my wood costs. Now we're going to place them down. Now, as I mentioned before, you always want to keep an eye again on your heat in terms of what areas you're going to want to build inside of to ensure those buildings are actually heated to provide benefits for later on in the round. The purpose of me going after some locations like tents is to be able to get some of these workers into tents for the night phase to ensure a lot of people don't get sick. I decided to go ahead and place 3 tent buildings right on the front side of the generator tile. I've done this again taking a look at the yellow buildings, which they are, and how high up the chart they have to be in order to be heated. But the benefit is if I put them close to the generator tile or on them, even better, then it's a little bit easier to keep them heated, thereby keeping individuals at nighttime warm, which is going to be a bonus for me. Now, that's just my strategy here in this play. You can come up with your own. Believe me, there is a lot of different combinations and ways to go about this. When doing the construct action, make note of the fact that the other buildings down at the bottom of the board cannot be built unless you have the law that allows you to build them. So in this case, we're going to focus still on the buildings board here because I still want to build a couple more things. I am going to build that final tent because I'm looking at how many workers I have to start things off, and engineers and children. And in terms of engineers, I had 3. I had 5 total workers, so that's 8 right there, and 2 children. Even though they're paired up, they almost look like 4. It's 2. So there's 10 meeples in that supply board area at the beginning, which means I need 10 spots at nighttime for everybody to have a spot to be in a heated area. These tents can hold 2. If I build a total of 4 of them, then 8 of my 10 meeples will be warm. 2 of them are going to freeze. That's going to be a problem. I'm going to have to work through that and figure out how I can mitigate that going forward. I'm going to build the last tent for 2 wood. I'm going to also build the charcoal klin, which is going to be 1 wood, and finally the hunter's hut for 1 wood. That's going to leave me with 2 wood. Let's go ahead and place these buildings out on the map. So looking around for where I should place these buildings, looking for empty spaces. We have 2 over here, 1 near, 1 far. We also have a couple over on the other side of the board as well. So again, looking at what we have currently heated here, basically anything that's right beside the generator tile, orange or red is best. Unfortunately for the tent, which I'm about to build here, it's yellow, which means it's outside of what I'm currently producing heat-wise from the generator. So it's poorly insulated. It's not going to do so hot, but as long as I place it in this section here, which is adjacent to the generator tile or on the generator tile, then it will still be heated. So my best case scenario here is to place this one right here. That is the best location for it. It will still stay heated and be useful for individuals to stay in it at night. If I was to place it here, that would be a combination of this and this, which are both actually underneath the heat level. It would not be wise. I'm going to build the hunter's hut way over here. It's yellow as well, so I also want to keep it close enough to the generator to give it a fighting chance to be able to keep it heated. Lastly, I'm placing my charcoal klin way out here on a far tile, which is not usually the best, but it does have orange insulation, so it's a little better than normal, which means as of right now, even though it's really far away, it's still getting heat to it. Doesn't really matter for right now because I don't plan on actually activating it. So if I was to activate it right now with a worker, then it would be a warm action. And this would allow me to basically exchange a wood for 4 coal, which I think is going to be very useful later on, seeing as I've got a decent amount of wood laying around. I have 1 more engineer meeple who I'm going to use on an action of a building actually behind the generator. I've removed the generator from the generator tile in order for you to see the cookhouse behind it. I've placed my last engineer on it. If a building happens to have, and this one does not, by the way, but if it happens to have the engineer icon, and the icon looks like this, for example, not this specific token in terms of it being there, but just the icon itself. If you see that icon, a very small one on the building tile, only an engineer can go there, not a worker. In this case, because the engineer icon is not there, a worker or an engineer can go there. And it's a warm action right now because remember the generator tile is heated. So good news for us, we can now do what's on the bottom, which says we can consume or exchange essentially 3 food from the cookhouse in order to decrease discontent or increase hope. The food marker on the hunger track is going to drop down by 3. The cookhouse is giving us the option to increase hope or decrease discontent. Now, when no specific type of hope or discontent is mentioned, in other words, across hope and discontent, each of them have 3 different types. If you don't see any mention of a type, then you have 2 options in front of you and you can choose one. The first option is to draw a random token from the hope bag in this case, because we're choosing hope, and place it exhausted side up, which is the dark side, on the leftmost empty space on the corresponding track. That would meet what I'm looking to do because based on a card I saw during setup for the social dispute in the prior video I released, I know that there's a better benefit in having an additional hope beyond discontent. If we have more hope tokens than discontent tokens, that's going to be in my favor for that upcoming social dispute. I don't know when that's going to land, but there's only 2 cards in the deck, so it's a 50-50 chance. So that's the first option I have, is to draw a random token, put it exhausted side up, but that would certainly help me based on what I'm trying to plan here. The other option is to just activate any one exhausted token from the appropriate track. So looking at what I have here for hope, I can't activate anything because both are active. So in this case, I'm absolutely going to draw one at random here. And we ended up pulling a care token, which sits on its exhausted side. At this point, we're now moving into the dusk phase, and the thing you need to look for is anything mentioned on the scenario cards or in the event display that has any effects with the keywords dusk phase on them. At this point, you now resolve them in any order you choose. We have no such cards with those words on them, so we're going to go right here to the dusk deck, and we're going to reveal the top card. Flipping the card over, this is what I found, bringing it a little closer to the camera. This is called Suspicion. You'll see in the top right-hand corner there's a rotating arrow. This means once this card is resolved, it's going to go in the dusk board discard pile, which is the furthest left position of that particular board. So let's take a look at what this means. It says suspicion always haunts the guilty minds. Now this is the social dispute card that I was referring to earlier, which you do get to see because you get to see a social dispute card before it gets put inside the dust deck, and you're going to always be able to see one face up. We can see fear up there on the dusk board right now, which will be another one which will enter into the fray in the future, so you can always get a heads up as to what kind of social issues are coming up, and you can try to best plan for them. Remember when I went ahead just recently and bumped up my hope? Well, I did it because of this card right here. The card is broken down into multiple sections depending on how much hope you have in comparison with your discontent. So at the very top it says if you have more hope tokens than discontent tokens, which I made sure I did, you may exhaust one hope to perform the corresponding effect. The Justice one will allow us to discard one discontent token. That's amazing. We have Care here, so we can cure 3 or treat 3. And Motivation allows us to build a building that costs up to 2 wood for free. Now taking a look at our hope tokens, we do have the Justice token on the active side. That is the teal one in the far left position. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to exhaust that particular hope, flipping it to its darkened side. We get to choose when discarding a discontent token, whichever discontent token we wish. It can be active or it can be exhausted. In this case, I'm going to get rid of the active one. That's apathy. Both of them are apathy, but the active one's going. So we've exhausted the Justice hope token in order to deal with completely the apathy active token. And if you're wondering where the discontent token went, it went back inside the discontent bag. You can see the suspicion card here in the discarded slot, and something to make note of, there will always be at least one social dispute card inside of the dust deck. So when we're done resolving a social dispute, we're going to take the one which is face up, place it on top of the dust deck, and shuffle it up. It's a good idea to read it before putting it in to give yourself a better idea of how to plan for it. So we will have fear coming into the fray in the future, just giving you a heads up as to what's on the card here. It looks like, based on how we've got things going with our discontent and hope track, we're in good standing with this so far. The fear card has been shuffled into the dust deck in the center, and now it is revealed in the future. On the right hand side there, we're going to have confusion coming in. We've now entered the hunger phase, where we decrease hunger by spending food as much as possible. We'll do this momentarily. Resolve and reset hunger marker, and feed citizens indicated by the current round. The first thing we look for is whether or not the hunger marker is up the track. It is currently not. It's at 0, so we have no lingering hunger we need to take care of. If we did have any hunger from 1 or onwards at this point, we would go ahead and deal with a number of effects, which we'll talk about in the future when they happen, and then we'd reset the hunger marker back down here. We don't have to deal with any of that because we're coming in fresh. This is our first round to play, so we move on to the final step, and that is to feed citizens based on the current round. Now this might be difficult to see because it's quite a ways up top there, but at the very top left-hand corner is an icon for children. To the right of it in blue, we have engineers, and to the right of that, we have workers. Each one of those icons is corresponding to each of the columns in the round counter, and currently the round counter is on number 1, which is underneath the children, which means the children are the ones we need to feed this round. So if we take a look at our children citizens marker, we have it at 8 right now, which means it's going to cost us 8 food in order to feed them, dropping us from 14 down to 6. Of course, if we happen to lack the ability to actually feed our children in this case, we would be increasing the hunger marker for any difference. We now move into the night phase, which is the final phase of a day. Remember, again, we started in the action phase, so you've only seen the back half of the day. Very soon, you'll see a full day from dawn phase all the way through to night. The very first step is half ignored and half done, and that is to return spent citizen tokens and meeples to the supply. We don't have any spent citizen tokens out yet, so because of that, we don't have to worry about it, but all the meeples, essentially the workers and the engineers that were out doing work, they're all going back to the supply board. With all the meeples back in the supply, we're now going to go ahead and lay down citizen meeples inside the supply, which are going to be staying inside of a heated building. And we know based on all the tents we created, they can house up to 8 meeples. So 8 of these meeples are going to be getting heated sleep, while 2 of them are not. After putting as many citizen meeples inside the shelters that are heated as possible, the ones that are still standing are unfortunately not going to be able to sleep in anything warm, which is going to lead to sickness. So now we take a look at the population board, we find the sickness markers, and we have them all at the starting position here because nobody is currently sick, but we just left 2 workers out in the cold, so 2 workers are becoming sick. This goes up the track by 2. It is possible to split that up. I could have easily chosen to have an engineer and a worker out in the cold, or a child and a worker out in the cold, and I would just move the corresponding markers for each meeple that didn't have a heated shelter. And that finishes off our very first day. We wrap around to the dawn phase now, where we're going to pass a leadership marker. I'm not going to mention this again because, well, we're not using one, we're playing solo, so we'll skip past this, and we're going to move the round marker though. Way up in the top left hand corner, you'll see the round marker in gray. It's currently on 1, it's moving to 2. Now in this case, the dawn phase is very simple. It's just moving the round marker, but there might be potentially a development token in one of these round spaces. A development token comes from technology cards, and there's something that you can actually work towards in the future and unlock in order to increase your city's advancement in technology. You'll see how this works later on. For now, tokens that do exist in the round board are those trigger points for scenario cards. So you'll see on 4 and 10, we have triggers. If the round marker lands on one of those, we're going to go to the scenario card and resolve its effects. What we see there with the snowflake is involving a storm, something that we need to prepare for in the future, and it's not a positive thing. We're moving on to the morning phase, where we go to the same round and morning board. There was a deck of cards there. We're going to reveal the top card of the morning deck. So as you can see, at the beginning of each day, you're going to deal with the dawn phase on the left-hand side of this board and the morning phase with the morning card. The morning card we have is the birth of gambling. We haven't even been here that long, and these people already want to start chucking money and items around. It says there were plenty of things to take the burden off one's mind back in the old world. There's far fewer now, but some citizens have started to organize gambling nights. They bet everything: personal belongings, food, rations, sleeping spots, and even their work duties. We're going to activate greed now. When the game tells you to activate a hope or discontent token, and you do not have that token currently in play on the board, then you ignore that effect. Now we continue through the rest of the card, where we have a choice here. It says, let them have their thrills, but under one condition. Only personal belongings can be used for gambling. Only if you have the active justice can you do this one. The next one says, let them do it. They are adults. At this point, we take -1 discontent and add a card to the dust deck. The final one is gambling will not do any good. Order them to stop. This gives a +1 to anger. Unfortunately, I no longer have an active justice, so I cannot do that top option, but I do have an option between 2 and 3. This becomes a really tough thing to decide, because if I go with the number 2 option, I get a -1 discontent, which allows me to get rid of the apathy discontent token, meaning I'll have no discontent tokens whatsoever. Sounds great, but I don't know what that card is going to do beyond going into the dust deck and potentially coming up in the near future and throwing a complete wrench at me. So there's that. The other one will just, well, it just generates straight up anger. That will increase the overall discontent tokens. So I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and do number 2, and we're going to hope that the card is not nasty. So anytime you're told to decrease hope or discontent, you got to choose one of the following options. You can exhaust any one active token on the corresponding track, or you can remove any one exhausted token on the corresponding track, place it back in the bag, and of course you slide things over to the left as you need to. In this case, well, it is going to be the only token that's here. It's going back in the bag. Now we're grabbing the large dusk deck, which was placed off to the side during setup. We're going to go through it looking for card 0045. 0045 has been placed into the dust deck, and you'll notice no matter which option you chose, the same icon appears on the far right hand side. That is an X in the card. It means to remove the card from the game and place it back in the box. If there happens to be any resources on it or any meeples, meeples go back to the supply, resources go back to the bank. We're now headed to the generator phase. We're going to fuel the generator. We're going to gain 6 citizens based on the heat and cold markers. We're going to drop coal from the bank into the top of the generator. We're going to place cubes in the drawer at the bottom of the generator onto the stress track, and we're going to check for the generator breaking down and reset the heat marker. Moving into the generator phase, the first thing we're allowed to do is to fuel the generator. We can place additional coal in at this point if we want. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, you're going to want to keep an eye here on the heat marker and the cold marker, because right after this step, we're going to check whatever icons are in between them, and those particular icons or citizen types are going to become sick based on the number of them represented in between. Only the ones in between. So in this case, if we don't put any more coal in, we are getting one more sick worker. So how do we mitigate this? We spend 1 coal from our supply to bump the heat up. So the 1 coal has been spent, the heat marker is up, and now we're going to go into the check between the cold and heat marker, and there's nothing in between them, so no sickness to be doled out. Again, you don't have to. You can choose, if you don't have coal or you want to reserve coal for later for some other reason, not to go ahead and put coal in as the first step in the generator phase. But in this case, I've got some, so I'm going to do it. The next step is the generator stress level. So yes, you can pump coal into a generator and generate heat. However, there is a stress factor to kind of overdoing that. And in this case, you can see that stress factor over here. It says 3 based on wherever the heat marker currently is. So we're going to grab 3 coal to represent the stress. These 3 coal are going to be dropped straight into the generator miniature. And it's very likely that this thing should not be referred to as a miniature. It is actually massive. Looks extremely cool. We're going to take these 3 coal and we're going to drop them straight into the generator. Now you open the drawer at the bottom of the generator, and if any of the coal cubes landed in the drawer, you're going to take all of them out at this point and close the drawer. If you happen to have any coal cubes from the generator drawer, you're going to place them on the stress track, which is on the generator board. You'll see 10 small spaces there, and you'll continue to fill this up over time. It's not something you're trying to accomplish. This is representative of the generator stressing out over time from its usage, and it can lead to a breakdown. The breakdown occurs when you get your 11th cube placed in. That cube or any cubes beyond it would be placed in the larger square up top, and at this point the generator would break down. There's an additional section called Generator Breakdown on the 20th page of the first edition rulebook, which I highly recommend you read, as it will relate back to another lost condition in the game we talked about before in terms of the generator breaking down a second time. When that happens, the generator explodes and the game is over. There's a bunch of things that will also change after that first breakdown, which is very cool. So I recommend you check that out. As of right now, regardless if the generator breaks or doesn't break, we're going to reset the heat marker by moving it back to the first space of the heat track. And as I just mentioned, the heat marker has been reset down to the bottom of the track. We're now going to the weather phase, where we're going to reveal a weather card, advance the cold marker and heat range indicators. We're going to gain food based on the hunting symbols on hunters' huts. We're going to advance scouts on expedition stacks, and we're going to move the storm marker and possibly resolve a storm. The weather cards are to the left of the generator board. We're going to go ahead and take one and reveal it in the bottom area. The weather phase represents it getting colder every single day, just like in Canada, requiring more heat to keep everyone warm. At the very top here, you're going to have the movement of heat range indicators. The next section is hunters' traps. The section after that is expedition progress, and finally moving of the storm marker. So we'll resolve the movement of the heat range indicators first. It's indicating to us that every single one of them is going to be moving up by 1. So the cold marker is going to go up by 1, as well as each one of the insulated building markers. So you can quickly see how this is going to continue to progress, and having enough coal to be able to generate enough heat is going to become harder and harder as time goes on. Next, we see how well our hunters' traps did, and according to this, we have 1 food coming in for everywhere we have one of those hunter symbols. Thankfully, because I built a hunter's hut, I do have the ability to gain 1 food from it. Now, it's also worth mentioning on the tile itself, it mentions 4 food. Don't get this confused with what's happening right now. The 4 food comes as an action when a worker gets placed on this location. So we'll talk about that, and I'll most likely use it in the upcoming actions phase For now, we're just counting all those green antler icons everywhere we can find them. So 1 food for us is going to boost us from the current 6 we're at to 7. Thanks to the Hunter's Hut, we're going up by 1 as mentioned to 7. And now we look at the next section here for Expedition Progress, which has a tools crossed. There's a 3 there. It's letting us know how much those scouts, which are on expeditions, are going to progress. We currently don't have any scouts on any expeditions, so we're not doing this at all. We're moving to the next stage here, which is whether the storm is moving. You'll look in the center of the icon and it will let you know how many steps backwards the storm is going to move, essentially moving closer to your current round. And of course, when it meets your round marker on the round board, then the associated storm is going to hit. And again, it's based on the scenario. So in this case, we have a new home storm up here. We have no idea what it is, but it will be revealed in the future. And I bet it's not going to be positive. Moving to the preparation phase, we have to choose an advisor. It's optional, in other words, to activate one if we wish. And then after that, we're going to resolve sickness markers effects. Now I have 2 cards that I can use during the preparation phase, and it's worth mentioning when you're playing solo, you're given the Call to Rise card, and it's a card that may be played independently of your advisor card. So normally when you're playing with multiple people on the table, everyone gets to play an advisor. So in this case, because I'm playing solo, I have an advisor, which I chose from the get-go. I chose this one specifically because I had a care token on the Discontent and the Hope track, and so I thought it would be worthwhile to have this one because I can exhaust care, which I do have, and I have one that's active, in order to cure 2 in the future. Plus, I got really lucky and drew another care out of the bag later on, making this even more interesting. Now, on top of being able to do that, I could also do a Call to Rise here, and this allows me to draw citizen cards based on if I have a certain amount of hope tokens. Now you'll notice on the Call to Rise card that the remove from game symbol is there. So this is a one-time use card that can provide you with additional citizen cards. But again, it's going to be used once and then it's gone and removed from the game. So you need to choose wisely as to when these citizens stand up to help you out. Now, just as a side mention about citizen cards, in case you forgot, I do have citizen cards in my hand. So I've got a total of 6 citizen cards. When I set up the game, I had 7. I had to choose one of them to die off, and I picked one. It is sideways underneath the citizen deck up there in the top left-hand corner. The reason I'm even mentioning citizen cards is because this Call to Rise card, which is specific to solo play, will allow you to draw up more citizen cards. I wouldn't recommend doing this in the very first or second day. I guess the only time you could do it is in the second day, seeing as you start in the actions phase from the beginning of the scenario. So either way, I wouldn't recommend doing this right away, as you have a handful of citizen cards to work with from the very beginning. The different uses for citizen cards are twofold. One is you can choose to use it for its main ability on the card. You simply pair it up when you're using a worker. You can see the worker icon right on the card. So if I happen to be gathering resources, I could choose to use this individual to gain the benefit on the card as written. The other way I can use this particular citizen card is if that particular worker died in terms of its type. So if we had a worker die, then I could use this particular citizen to die off, and I would actually take -1 hope based on the bottom left-hand corner tying into the worker icon, rather than killing off a completely random citizen from the citizen deck way over here. Those are the 2 ways in which you use citizen cards, or can use citizens cards. So now that you have that understanding, looking at the Call to Rise during the preparation phase right now doesn't make a lot of sense to add a ton more citizens to my hand unless I really didn't like what I had for options for citizens off the start of the game. But still, you're going to get the best bang for your buck on Call to Rise if you can get your hope up high enough to generate the most amount of citizen cards coming into your hand. I'm not going to be using the Call to Rise card during this preparation phase, but I'm going to use the Health Advisor. And when I use the Health Advisor, I have to exhaust a care token. So I've got an active care token up there on the Hope track. I brought it down so you can actually see it. I'll be flipping this over and placing it right back to where it was in order to cure 2. When you cure 2, you take a look at your sickness markers and you can move any of them left the number of times you have the cure, so in this case 2. So I can take the 2 workers that I have which are sick and bring them back to full health, and at this point nobody is sick. So the trade-off for actually exhausting some of these hope tokens is that as we move into the game further, if we happen to get cards that say if you happen to have justice, like the far left one there, or care, like the other two, that are active, which none of these are anymore, then you can do XYZ. I won't be able to do XYZ. So that's the limitation, is I'm using it for my advisor, but now I'm not able to use it for something else. However, as you saw in the last day, during the actions phase, I took a worker and brought them to the cookhouse, and one of the options was, instead of adding an additional hope token, I could activate one. So this is the reasoning behind me doing what I just did, is that I can reactivate a care token in this next actions phase coming up soon. The final step of the preparation phase is to resolve any sicknesses, and you do this by taking a look at your sickness markers. In my case, they're all on 0, so I would skip right past this and we'd be heading right into the actions phase, but I'll talk about what happens in other situations. So the situations where you're going to be skipping past it and moving on is if your sickness markers are either not on the track whatsoever, or they only reside in this first section right here. And how you know that the sickness effects are going to trigger is based on the bottom row right here. You'll see there's icons once you get to the second section, another set of icons up here, and it continues all the way down the track. So as long as I had a left, let's say hypothetically I didn't use my health advisor and I had 2 sick workers, I could still just skip on past this particular step and move right into the actions phase. But if I happen to have had 5 sick workers, well, in this case, it's going to tell me to flip over this particular token, going from the syringe side to this skull side. And what this represents is, of the 5 workers that I have here, which are sick, one of them has become gravely ill. And if that token flips back over, it represents an actual death of that individual. Not only would it flip over at some other point down the line, which would not be good, but then you're going to reduce the amount of people because that person died. This again ties into page 30 of the first edition rulebook around sickness and death, which you can read, but this will instantly move the corpse marker on this track, which again is pushing towards an end game, which you don't want to see. Now you may have noticed some tokens sitting next to the supply board that relate to each citizen type. You have workers, engineers, and children from top to bottom. These are called spent citizen tokens. And basically, if you have enough sick individuals on the population board, at a certain point, you're going to be taking these tokens and placing them in the supply area, and they're going to make some of your meeples stuck in place and not able to be used to actually do work in order to progress anything. So in other words, you've got so much sickness going on that your worker meeples are now being impacted. How those come into play is if one of your sickness markers happens to be all the way down the track into a position like this, where you can see 1 meeple and 1 flip. Not only would this flip over, putting you in danger of a potential death in the near future from another flip, but on top of it, you're going to have 1 spent citizen token of that type, which would be a worker, placed in your supply area, and in the next actions phase, one of your workers is sitting on top of it doing nothing. We now head into the actions phase where we're going to adjust the number of citizen meeples in the supply. To do this, we'll take a look at the population board, we'll take a look at the markers for each citizen type, and we'll determine which section they're in. It will tell us how many meeples of each kind should be in the supply. We currently don't have any changes to make. It's worth noting, if you have a meeple on an expedition, that meeple that's sitting on one of these cards, if you had sent one, would still count towards the total number of meeples inside the supply as well. So don't add an additional one in here because you have one out on an expedition. And just to close the loop on the spent civilian tokens we talked about moments ago, if you happen to have 1 or more of these in your supply area, for every one that you have, you're going to find the matching corresponding civilian meeple and place it on top. This is going to let you know that that meeple is locked. It's already been spent for this actions phase. You're not going to be able to use it elsewhere. I don't have to worry about that right now, so we're going to dive right into our actions. The first thing I can do on my turn is to put coal in the generator if I want to generate heat. Currently, everything is freezing, so it'd be a good idea to put some coal in the generator to get things going. It'll allow me to gather resources nearby to my generator tile, which would be useful. I don't have a ton of coal right now, and based on the last weather card, things got tougher to heat. I only have 2 coal in the supply. I'll be spending both of them. So we're going to go ahead and pay 2 coal in order to raise the heat of the generator up to the 2nd position. This is going to heat all red buildings and everything directly on the generator tile only. So currently, based on the fact I spent 2 coal, I'm not going to be able to make this a warm action, placing a worker here to do the charcoal clean. I can still place a worker here, but the problem is that worker type will become sick. That individual will get sick being as far away from the generator tile as possible. Right now, I'm only heating the tile itself right here, so the only actions I have available to me that are considered heated are going to be gathering resources like wood back here, which I certainly plan to do, coal on the opposite side, which I also plan to do, and of course the cookhouse at the back, which I told you about earlier. I want to go back there in order to activate an exhausted care hope token. Now, because I'm playing solo, I'm going to go ahead and just place 3 workers for all the heated actions I plan to do. They're quick to resolve. It's worth mentioning when you're playing the game, you place 1 worker and you resolve the action fully. I'm just doing this in order to speed things up. These are easy actions. We have gather resources right here, 2 wood, gather over here for 2 coal, and we're going to be going to the cookhouse here, and we're going to be spending 3 food to activate a hope token, which is care. Now, the last thing I'll mention here is I move the generator from the center in order for you to see the cookhouse. This is the last time I'm doing this, and that's because, if you remember earlier, we dropped coal into the generator and not all of it fell to the bottom drawer. You do not want to be moving the generator in any way, shape, or form during gameplay. There is coal inside, precariously perched on certain levels of that generator, and moving it could cause it to drop down to the bottom drawer. So don't move it like I did. I'm just simply showing you where the meeples are. We won't be moving it again in the future. So the 2 trees and the 2 coal are now part of our supply. Let's go ahead and reduce our food in order to activate a care. So we'll spend our 3 food, dropping us down to 4. Again, going into this round, we're on round number 2 now, so the citizen type we'll be feeding in the future is going to be the engineers. And those, there are 12 of them. We're going to need to get up to 12 food in order to make sure everybody is fed. So we are certainly going to have our work cut out for us. We might have to go remove some snow to find some food, and also maybe use the hunter's hut. As we know, we can decrease discontent or increase hope based on the cookhouse. I'm going to increase hope. So I have a choice. I can pull from the bag and have another hope token here, which would be awesome, or I can activate one that already exists. I really like being able to use my health advisor to deal with or cure sick individuals. This is good until we get some buildings established that can actually do this maybe more efficiently without hitting our hope. So I'm going to place a worker on the charcoal clean next. We're going to replace 1 wood from the supply with 4 coal. This certainly makes me feel better about my coal supply, and wood supply is not doing too bad, but it's not all that great. And we know that that action at the charcoal clean was way outside of the range of heat generated by the generator, and also outside of the insulated buildings that the heat currently covers. It's only currently covering red, and that was an orange charcoal clean. So because of this, we have the worker type that went out there get sick. I'm going to go ahead and choose to have a worker head out into the cold in order to gather resources. This tile is not generated by heat. Gathering resources in the cold is going to cause another point of sickness for the workers. Now we'll go ahead and move a worker to the construct action where we can build or dismantle. I'm going to choose to build. I can build up to 3 times. I'm going to use all the wood in my supply. We're going to first start off with a bunkhouse. This is going to give us the 2 additional positions to make sure that everybody has a warm place to stay during the night. And then we're going to build 2 hunters' huts. I've had a last minute change of heart. Instead of building 2 hunters' huts at 1 wood apiece, I'm going to build 1 at 1 wood, and I'm going to build a workshop at another wood. The buildings have been constructed. We have a bunkhouse here, a hunter's hut here, and way over here, a workshop. Now again, I'm keeping the bunkhouse and the hunter's hut closer by so that it doesn't hurt me as much in terms of their high usage rates, most likely. I'll be using them quite often, and I want them to stay heated. Now the workshop is something I'll be using here and there, plus it's highly insulated, so I'm going to push it as far away as possible. Now, one of the major reasons that I changed out one of the hunter's huts for the workshop instead, they cost exactly the same, is there's an advantage to the workshop which I really like, and that is when you build your first workshop, you get to start developing new technology. So we're now taking a look at the technology cards, which are inside the technology display, which were set up at the beginning of the game, and we get to choose one to begin working towards. We're going to take its development token that's on the card. We're going to place it on the round track a number of spaces ahead of the round marker as depicted on the card. You'll see each of these cards in the bottom right-hand corner has a development token. Beside it, it tells you how many spaces away from the round track you are going to go ahead and place that token. In other words, you're going to have to wait for a while for it to be fully developed. Each of these technologies happen to be 4 rounds away from the current round marker when we choose one. There will be others that have different time frame requirements. The first technology is called natural fertilizer. Whenever you use a hothouse with an engineer meeple, you may move the corpse marker backwards 1 space on the corpse track to gain an additional 3 food. So essentially you're saving yourself on the corpse track because that is an end game condition to lose if you have too many corpses, up to 10. You can use a corpse to generate food. Of course, natural fertilizer. And we have the charcoal clin upgrade. Whenever you use a charcoal clin, you may remove a tree from any map tile instead of spending 1 wood. Let's go over the final 2 technology cards. We have Night Care, which states each heated medical post and infirmary provides 1 sleeping spot for an engineer meeple. This could be very useful later on. Right now, we have the housing situation well under control, so I'm not going to push for this one at this point. The one after it is a little bit more interesting timing-wise. This one is Lighter Scout Sleds. It says whenever you deploy scouts on an expedition or continue an expedition, move the scout 1 space forward. This is going to have us moving at a faster pace than normal if we can get this technology developed. Now, it's worth mentioning we can't go on any expeditions, hence why I haven't actually sent any meeples, or a meeple I should say, on an expedition, and that's because we haven't built the beacon. But the good news is we need to build the beacon regardless, because in order to succeed at our very first scenario trigger, we need to have the beacon built by round 4. So that is something I'm eyeing doing in the future. So this one could be very worthwhile just based on the timing of when it will be completed. So we're going to go with developing the Lighter Scout Sleds. We're going to take the development token and place it 4 spaces down the track from the round tracker. The round tracker is currently on round 2, so we'll be placing this on round 6. That's going to do it for the workshop, and it's worth mentioning this only occurs the first time you build a workshop. And then what happens is when we eventually land on this particular development token, that technology will be developed and we can choose another one, and another one is placed on the track. I have 2 more engineers left, and guess what I'm thinking of doing? The workshop requires an engineer to use it if we want to take the workshop action. The workshop action is different than what you just saw in terms of what you do when you place your first workshop. We can take an action here to actually do something that can benefit us around these technologies and other things. And what's awesome timing-wise is that our heat generated by the generator is providing heat to red buildings no matter where they are. So we can do this as a heated action, so no sickness. As you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the workshop tile, there's an engineer icon letting you know only engineers can take the action of interacting with the workshop, which makes a lot of sense. So by sending an engineer here, it gives you the ability to take 2 of the following effects, and you can do 2 of the same effect or 1 of each of the 2 effects available at this workshop. So let's go over those 2 different effects you can do here. The first one is to move the development token 1 space backwards on the round track. What are you doing by this? Well, you're essentially speeding up how fast you develop the technology we just talked about earlier. So we can basically place an engineer here, and we can actually move that development token back 2 spaces if we want to use the workshop for this effect twice, which we can do. The other effect we could use if we want is upgrading a building. You take a look at the buildings board, it depicts the building cost of an upgrade, which is underneath of the regular cost for building a building. So to give you a visual on the cost of buildings, again, you always see the white in terms of what you need to spend in order to build it for the very first time. And then the upgrade cost for the associated column is underneath, and it's in gold. And that will show you whether it's wood or steam cores in terms of getting these things upgraded. Now, when you do upgrade a building, there's a constraint. You cannot upgrade buildings that have diamonds around the name. So for instance, you cannot upgrade a workshop, a factory, a bunkhouse. Any of the tents I built don't get upgraded, or houses. Those are the ones on the main building board that don't. All the other buildings are able to be upgraded, and if you do, you simply just take them. Of course, they'd actually be on the map at the point when you upgrade them, and you'd flip them over. And this can change what that particular building can do. You can reference the rulebook for that. You'll also see sometimes the insulation level will also change. Now, I'd absolutely love to upgrade the Hunter's Hut because it only costs 1 wood. The problem is I don't have any in my supply right now, so I can't do it. So I'm going to focus instead on moving up the development token, and we're going to do this effect twice as we can at the workshop. So it's going to move from 6 to 4. And overall, this isn't bad because now it's actually syncing up with the scenario trigger, which has us needing to build the beacon by this point, which will then allow for expeditions in the first place. Of course, we can build the beacon earlier than that, but this allows us to start making use of those scout sleds for sure around the same time frame roughly that we get that beacon up and running. So this could pair up nicely. With my final action and my final worker that can actually do work is going to be the engineer going to the hunter's hut for 4 food. This is unfortunately outside of what heat is being generated from the generator, so it's a cold action. 1 engineer is getting sick. The good news is, though, we're going to jump ourselves from 4 food up to 8, and there's the engineer getting sick. Now, I do have a retroactive correction to make. It's going to have no gameplay impact because I caught it as we move now into the dusk phase, but whenever you're done resolving a social dispute card, you are going to remove it from the game. It is not going to go in the dusk discard pile, which you can see there on the left-hand side. There will be certain cards which will end up there, but social disputes will not. So we're going to take that and remove it. And just like that, we're all squared away. No impact at all to gameplay, thankfully, and we can move into the dusk phase. The first thing we check is any scenario display cards or event display cards. We currently don't have any event display cards yet, but any of them that have the dusk phase keyword on them, we resolve things for that right now. We'll skip right past it. We're going to draw a dusk card. This card is a dusk card. It's called The Inevitable. It says, every day we fight a bitter struggle against hunger, cold, and disease. There will be losses. Flip every sickness marker on its skull side to its syringe side. So you can see that cards coming out of this dust deck can do some flipping as well beyond what can happen off the population board. So that is pretty nasty. The good news is we currently don't have any sickness markers for any of the civilian types on the skull side. If we had of, when they flip from the skull to the syringe, that's a death. So we ended up avoiding 1 nasty outcome, but you'll see down below it says for each corpse marker you have, gain 1 sick citizen. And when we started off the scenario, we were told to put this token on the 1 spot because we had 1 citizen die off. So we are going to have somebody getting sick. It doesn't specifically mention which type is going to get sick, so we get to choose. I'm going to move a worker up 1 space. That's going to resolve that. And also on the dust card itself, based on the icons, or even if there's no icons on it, if you happen to see a red X, the dust card is removed from the game completely. If you happen to see an exclamation mark, you're going to place the card in the event display. That will happen eventually. We will get an event. And of course, if there's no icon on the card whatsoever, then that card is just going to go right into the discard pile. So as there is no markings on this card icon-wise, it goes straight to the discard pile. So the overall reason why these dust cards with no icons on them go in the discard pile is because they could be reshuffled back into the dust deck at a later time. So again, make sure when you're resolving your social disputes, which will come up and through the dust deck, those social disputes should never land in the discard pile for the dusk board. Moving into the hunger phase, do we need to deal with anything from the hunger tracker? No, we do not, because we currently don't have any outstanding hunger. Now we move to feeding citizens based on the round 2. It's the engineers that need to be fed. There are 12 of them. We only have 8 food, so we're going to consume 8 food, bringing this down to 0. And we're going to uptick our hunger marker by 4 for the very first time, meaning that 4 people are going hungry. We now enter the night phase. We are at the end of the day. We're going to return all the spent citizen tokens that have meeples on them back to the bank, place all the meeples on them back into the supply. We don't have to deal with any of this because we didn't have that in play, but we will be returning all our meeples back to the supply. Just a final reminder, which I won't mention again, when you bring your meeples back to the supply, do not bring any meeples that are on expeditions back to the supply. They are off on their expeditions. Now, we move into a piece of the pie which is not so good for me, and that is heated shelters. And that's because I was not able to get as much coal into the generator during this day, and so my heat levels are not that great. Currently, I only have the generator tile heated, and on that tile is only 3 tents. Thank goodness I at least have that. So 6 of these individuals, even though I have spots for all of them inside of shelters, only 6 of them are going to be heated. That's all that matters. Let's lay them down. Again, I have complete choice on which of my meeples are going to be in heated shelters, so the ones which are not are going to be 2 engineers, a worker, and children. It ended up being a pretty rough night for my citizens. As you can see, a focus on trying to cure these 6 citizens is going to be a big time focus going into the next round of play. Start of the brand new dawn phase, we're going to go ahead and move the round marker from 2 to 3. And just a heads up, we're going to have our work cut out for us because remember, in terms of feeding civilian types, it's going to be the workers that now need to be fed. We have 22 of them, so we're going to need lots of food. We're now in the morning phase of our day, and we have a morning card called a new project. It says one of our engineers has an idea that may help us provide more food each day for the city. He needs some resources, but perhaps it would prove worth the investment. Actually, to be honest, we need a lot of food right now, so this actually could be something worthwhile. Now, it won't pay off if we go with the option number 1 here versus number 2. Number 2 is straight up, we just don't want to put any resources into this or any efforts into this, so we would just go right down the discontent. We would just be gaining 1 and that would be it. That'd be the end of it. If we choose number 1, we place this card in the event display. It would be the first event that we have, and then during the action phase, as it states, we can put an engineer there and actually put more than 1 engineer there if we want, because for every engineer we place there, we gain a wood. The best case scenario is, in the action phase, we place 2 engineers there, we get 2 wood, we get to add a card to the dust stack that likely will be the finishing of whatever that project is, hopefully giving us some better way to get food, I hope. And then of course, if we actually take option number 1, put this in the event display, and then we don't do anything, we never put any engineers on it to work on it, then we basically gain apathy, which actually makes a lot of thematic sense. I'm going to decide to go with option number 1, so we are going to give him what he needs. At least that's what we are telling him we're going to do. And of course, we can decide whether to put engineers there or not during the action phase coming up. Now, the event display is normally on the ridge of this area up here, but again, because of the table size that I'm working with, I don't have a lot of clearance with that, so I'm placing it right here for now. We don't have anything built out over there. It'll just sit within easy viewing so I can remember it, and we'll move on. Now we move into the generator phase, where our biggest focus is on the difference in terms of the heat marker and the cold marker. In between them are the 2 different citizen types that will be affected by 1 point each in this case, in terms of their sickness markers going up by 1 if we decide not to put coal in the generator, which I'm definitely going to do. So I'm going to put 2 coal in the generator. That is going to bump this heat up 2 positions. I spent 2 coal from the supply, it's going back to the bank, and this avoids us having to bump up markers that are sick, and of course it's really bad because if this one had gone into this section here, we start getting into ones that have nastier and nastier effects as it goes up, so let's keep things in that first section. Based on where the heat marker currently is, we're going to do our generator stress test now. We're going to take 3 coal because that's how much it indicates right beside it based on where we've been pumping up the heat, and it's going to be dropped straight down through the generator. We'll see what lands in the drawer. Now we know previously we dropped 3 in there and none of them came down through the drawer, so we have another 3 going in. We'll see what happens. Oh, I sense some movement and I'm pretty sure I heard the drawer fill up a little bit. Well, my friends, that's pretty bad. We had 5 coal cubes end up coming through. There's only 1 still in there. They are all going on the stress track. So looking at the generator board here, we have the 10 small spaces where these cubes can sit. So we're going to go ahead and place 5 of them right now. 5 cubes in the stress track. And if we do this procedure in the future and we happen to have more than what can actually fit in here, they go into the overflow area up top, as I mentioned below. And of course, this is going to lead to a generator breakdown, which is not something you want to see. Finally, we're going to reset the heat marker back to the first position. And now we move on to the weather phase. I've gone ahead and drawn up a weather card. And what looks like at the top section here, we're going to have the cold marker going up by 1, as well as the yellow insulated buildings. As the cold continues to increase, we have a tougher time keeping heat going to yellow insulated buildings, which have the least insulation, and also buildings that are built furthest away from the generator. Next, we're going to check out our hunter's traps here, and we're going to get 1 food for each one of them based on what I've built. I'm going to get 2. We do have a hunger marker in place, so it's going to drop our hunger by 2. Scouts out on expeditions are going to advance based on the number located here, so 2. I don't have any currently, skipping past that. And then unfortunately, the storm this time around is going to move. The weather has changed the storm in terms of its timing, and it is now coming closer to us. It moves from 9 to 7 based on the 2 found in the snowflake of the weather card. So as you can see, you can plan for rounds in the future, but things won't always stay exactly static where they are. We're now moving to the preparation phase, and at this point we get to choose if we want to use an advisor or if I want to use my solo-specific card to gain more citizens. I do not want to do that just yet. I will be using the health advisor though, so I'm going to flip over the active care hope token to the exhausted side. And I'm going to choose to bump back my workers' sickness by 2. We now resolve sickness, and we do this by taking a look to see if any of the sickness markers are on space 26 or higher of the population track. If they are, you lose the game from overwhelming sickness. Otherwise, we just resolve the effect of each sickness marker on the population track from lowest to highest. For each sickness marker, you resolve the effect of each icon in the section the marker is in. What that means is, as I mentioned before, down below here, if we happen to have any of those sickness markers in this area, we will resolve these, whether it be an impact in the number of meeples we have in terms of spent citizen tokens, like this one right here, or if it's a flip, it's just going to be a flipping of the token, which is going to get us one step closer to death as one of those citizens becomes gravely ill. And so we want to avoid sickness as much as possible, because when we get to those upper levels, things really start hampering us. We have way less workers to go out and work because they're sick, and on top of it, we have more deaths occurring at a faster rate. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up part number 1 of the showcase for Frostpunk, the board game from Glass Cannon Unplugged. I really hope that this episode helps you understand the flow of the game. You got to see a lot of what's going on in the very first handful of rounds. It's also worth mentioning the fact that as we continue on with this play, explanations are going to drop off tremendously as we move forward. And of course, I'll only be speaking to things that are brand new. We've seen a good chunk of the flow to the point where things are going to start to pick up steam now. And of course, I hope it's in a positive manner, but this game is all about survival. And so the chances of your victory are already working against you, which makes the win side of the equation, when you get one, that much more satisfying. Hope you guys are enjoying this. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.